Everyone, and welcome. Really happy to have you joining us here this morning for the Person-Centered Planning and an introduction to Charting the Life Course conversation. My name is Betsy Hopkins, and I am the Associate Director, and I oversee developmental disability, autism, and brain injury services here in Maine. We're really excited to be here with you all and also to be here with our colleagues, Barbara Brent from the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disabilities Services and Jenny Turner from the University of Missouri, Kansas City Institute for Human Development to talk about person-centered planning and to introduce the Charting the Life Course framework. They will introduce themselves more in depth in just a bit, but before we dive in to the Charting the Life Course framework discussion, I wanted to just start off by sharing some historical perspective and why this training on the person-centered planning process, especially now, is such an important topic here in Maine. Next slide. This conversation that we're having today and what you're going to be hearing is not something new in Maine. Rather, it's really a return to person-centered planning principles that were developed as part of the development of community-based services and the closure of Pineland Center back in 1996. With the closure of Pineland, Maine moved at that time to develop a community-based system premised on developing supports that focused on the person, their supports, and the community. And since that time, Maine individuals with intellectual, developmental disabilities, and autism and their families have been strong advocates for the development of services driven by their right to live, work, and be part of their communities. Next slide. During the course of the last several years, but more specifically the last couple of years, we've been gathering quite a bit of feedback and stakeholder information from stakeholders about the current system that is the person-centered planning system. And among that, the stakeholder feedback included a community membership reform work group, which tackled a number of areas targeting community membership and trying to improve access to communities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, especially the person-centered planning process. The community membership reform work group met for a little over a year, was made up of a cross-representation of individuals who were invested in improving developmental disability services in Maine. The work group included individuals receiving services, representatives from provider agencies, family members, advocates, and state agency staff at ODES. And as I said, one of the primary focus area that they were focused on was person-centered planning. Some of their recommendations included us to review documents that require in-person-centered planning, to remove the duplication and streamline that process, develop a person-centered plan that allows for varying planning methods, styles, and types of approach, including assisting people to run their own meetings and be active in the development of their plan, to create plain language tools to help with facilitating meetings, and then also to create, find, and implement tools that can be used to guide and inform the person-centered plan with a focus on valued roles, places in communities, skills, and interests, including implementing the Charting the Life Course framework, which we're going to hear about today. Speaking up for us, self-advocates also provided a significant amount of feedback and recommendations for improving the PCP process. At the top of this slide are some fairly telling quotes, frankly, from self-advocates in particular about their thoughts around the current process that's being used around person-centered planning. Some of those quotes are, "Plans are not always written in words that I can understand. Future planning is lacking. How can I move forward in my life? My goals usually stay the same. I mostly get frustrated when they say I can't do that or the agency doesn't provide that service." And finally, choices must be demonstrated to assure a person has made a decision about his or her life. If there is a conflict, go to a private, separate meeting to resolve it. and full, fair, and equal participation make for a great quality meeting. If people are silent, something is wrong. Some very specific recommendations from this group, including updating the PCP process to promote choice and control, to include the charting the life course and other planning tools to help focus on life experience that self-advocates want discussed during planning, to include training for all around real goal setting, to include checks and balances in the process, and to make sure that the goals can be adjusted if necessary, and that the person-centered planning process is really working. In addition, as a public entity, the department has a responsibility under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, to ensure individuals receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. To that end, the department is in the process of making changes to our Section 21 waiver program. These changes are happening in part to implement a settlement agreement between the department and the United States Department of Justice. The department has also been working to implement Center for Medicaid Service regulations of the person-centered planning process and the home and community-based settings rule. This slide specifically outlines the requirement that the department agreed to in that settlement, which I'm not going to read through here, but really what we're talking about is trying to shift the focus and focus on all people. The person-centered planning is a process that begins with the understanding that all people have the right to live, work, and pursue their dreams in their communities. People have the right to figure out and pursue their own good life. What defines a good life is as individualized and unique as the person being supported. And person-centered planning should be a continuous process of listening, learning, and designed to explore various aspects of life that all people experience. For example, what to do during the day for folks, who to have relationships with and how to be involved in their communities, where to live and with whom, and how to stay healthy and safe. The person-centered process should focus on life outcomes. A person with a disability should have the same goals for life outcomes as those without disabilities. To support people in planning, it's really important to keep life outcomes in mind and not just focus on service outcomes. Life experience can lead us to or away from our vision and goals, and services and supports are meant to facilitate experiences that move a person toward their vision and goals. We're really talking about moving back to person-centered versus service-centered. One of the greatest barriers to a person realizing their goals is restricting what can happen based on limits of services and supports, particularly waiver services. As a result, a person may choose services or service settings that are not a good fit and don't help the person work toward their goals. So another important piece of work, of course, that's happening in Maine, which I know you all are very aware of, is Maine's coming into compliance with the Home and Community-Based Services Final Rule, as well as our global rule, which really specifies some specific criteria around planning for people in Medicaid HCBS services, including that plans are developed through a person-centered planning process. They are to be directed by the person to the fullest extent possible, includes individually identified goals and preferences, assists the individual in achieving personal goals in the most integrated community setting, ensures services reflect personal preferences and choices, ensures that providers of HCBS for the individual must not provide case management or develop the person-centered service plan, and then most importantly, offers choice to the individual regarding services and supports, and that the individual receives and from whom. I'm going to turn this over to Barb and Jenny now, but I wanted to just mention that we've been really fortunate to be working with them this past year in the Charting the Life Course Community of Practice. We believe, and hope you will as well after this presentation, that adopting this framework will help Maine address the concerns that were raised by many stakeholders, help us come into compliance with HCBS and the Department of Justice and get us back on the path to truly putting the person at the center of the planning process. Barb.
And if we could hold just one moment so the other interpreter could switch. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Brandt, and we do a little bit of a personal introduction because we feel like, as with people with disabilities and their families, that we should be able to talk a little bit about ourselves, because people very much talk about themselves as part of person-centered planning. And so we'll do a short introduction so you know who we are. And then what you can expect for this morning is a little bit of the Charting LifeCourse framework, what it means in what states are doing with the community of practice and what we've been doing, and it's been our honor to work with Maine. And then it will move to some of your own thoughts and feelings from what you've heard, and then move on to some next steps. So I'm Barb Brandt, and I'm the co-director of the COP along with my esteemed colleague Jenny Turner, and we really like working together and on this. So I work for NASDAs, that's how we shorten it, and we are the membership association for all the state directors of developmental disabilities. And so Betsy is our member, and so it's the executive branch directors, so not DD councils, but people that are in charge to help people have good lives in the community. So I'm a member of a racially and ethnically diverse family, which gives a little light into how we think about that in our world. I've been the state director in 2 states, and I am a person with epilepsy. And you kind of say, so what? But what I think maybe it does is give a lens into people that have had to experience all the joys of the different medications, and I can speak about how not fun they are and the side effects. I live in Arizona, as you can see from the cactus, and my littlest person likes to go fishing as long as everything can be pink. I really was excited to hear about going back to the roots of person-centered planning. I'm old enough to know your work with John O'Brien, who was one of my mentors, along with Marcia Forrest and others. So that's a little bit about me, and I'd like to turn it to my colleague and friend, Jenny.
Thank you, Barb, and good morning, everyone. Very excited to be here and very excited to see so many on the call. I think this is an important conversation, and it's great to see just the willingness to invest the time and energy to be a part of this discussion today. So like Barb said, my name is Jenny Turner, and I am her colleague and co-director of the National Community of Practice for Supporting Families. We make up the technical assistance, or TA team, for Maine. And so, as Betsy said, we have had the privilege of working with the team for the past year or so, a little over a year, to really think about what does it look like to incorporate person-centered thinking through the lens of charting the life course into the system transformation that we're undergoing. Like Betsy said, this is not something new. It is not changing the path that Maine was already on. It's helping to just kind of think a little bit about what it might look like to take the approach of charting the life course that was recommended by stakeholders, by self-advocates, by the reform work group, and really think through how does this impact the work that we are currently pursuing. So that's a little bit about kind of what the community of practice entails. Barb will talk about that more a little bit at the towards the end of our call, but a little bit about me. This work is really important to me for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, the hat that I never take off is that of big sister. So I have a sister in her 30s who has developmental disabilities and receives services from my home state in Missouri. So I understand what it is to sit on that side of the table, so to speak, and to experience planning conversations and working with providers and all of those different things in support of her. But I also have sat where many of you sit as a former case manager. That was one of my first experiences in the professional world, and learned a lot about both the joys and challenges of what it looks like to be a support coordinator and to facilitate person-centered planning and to really support people and families in good times and bad times and all of the times in between. So as you know, I just share that with you so that you know that we have been there and are not maybe as familiar with everything that is happening now, but definitely understand some of the pressures that you experience, as well as the desire to really do the work that you came to do, if that makes sense. We've oftentimes heard people describe charting the LifeCourse or other person-centered frameworks as a way to get back to what I signed up for, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how charting the LifeCourse supports the system requirements. We're still going to meet the requirements that Betsy talked about and that Barb will talk about a little bit to bookend our call, but we want to do that in a way that ultimately meets the needs of people and focuses on the individual and the family as a part of that process. So I get to support lots of states in my role, both with the community of practice and as the assistant director of the LifeCourse Nexus, which is our training and technical assistance center for all things charting the LifeCourse. So that's a little bit about me. Let's talk about charting the LifeCourse and what it is and how it really is the lens for continuing on the path and on the journey to returning to some of those person-centered foundational practices that Maine is really committed to. You know, Betsy talked about this. This is not something new. And so I would say that Maine is already steeped in person-centered thinking, right? There is a foundational belief and understanding, a emphasis on quality of life and well-being and informed choice and people being the experts in their own lives. There are values that are already existing in Maine. And so now the conversation is, how do we align our planning processes and our practices to reflect those values? How do we return to some of the ways of having conversations and facilitating problem solving and decision making that really does put the person in the driver's seat and really respects them and their loved ones as the decision makers about their own life related to their preferences and their interests? And so that's what person-centered planning and person-centered practices are. They're a methodology, they're an approach, they're a way to bring to life the things that we know to be true about people and about how to best support all people, whether they have a disability or not. And so charting the LifeCourse is one approach of person-centered planning, person-centered practices. It's not the only one. It's not the end-all be-all, but it is one way to think about and to begin to implement some of the ideals of person-centered thinking. There was a quote on one of Betsy's slides that I really love from John O'Brien, and he mentions, person-centered planning as a family of approaches. And so we see charting the LifeCourse as one of those family members, so to speak, to support the good work that you do. And one of the recommendations that we saw from self-advocates and from the reform group was not to be overly prescriptive. And so charting the LifeCourse is a way to think about different principles, and for Maine and for those in Maine to decide, how do we use these in such a way that we are supporting the person, but we're also meeting the requirements of the system. Charting the LifeCourse started about 10 to 12 years ago. It really ultimately began by families with disabilities, families who have experienced disability, for families of a person with a disability. It has broadened over the past 12 years to include, supporting youth in foster care, older adults, who are either aging in place or transitioning from a nursing home or whatever that might look like. I use it in my own life. My boyfriend is often telling me to stop LifeCoursing him because it's just something that we use in conversation. And many of the principles and the ideals that you will hear today may not feel profoundly new. In fact, I hope that they won't. I hope that you will see how this is a methodology or approach to continue to explore life possibilities, to give some language and some shared kind of common understanding around how to articulate ideas and hopes and fears that drive expectations to support a person to navigate towards the future that they desire, to really help advocate for a vision that they have for their life and for the services and supports that facilitate. I love how Betsy said that facilitate those experiences that lead to the life that they want. And I hope that you will see some strategies for problem solving and planning, especially in some of those tough situations where we all want the best for the person, but we're not entirely sure how to move forward. That's what Charting the Life course is all about. It begins with key principles. And really the framework is about those values, those concepts, and how they unite us around, again, a common language, a shared understanding to create the ability for a team to really work together, whether that's a team around an individual or a team at the state level or a team at an organizational level, thinking about how do we implement these enhancements, so to speak, to the current work that we're doing in such a way that really does respond to self-advocates and families. Based on those principles, there are a set of practices. And that's what Maine gets the opportunity to say, these are what our specific actions, policies, and procedures will be. We're going to take the lens of Charting the Life course, the concepts and the frameworks, and decide how we want to implement them in the way that makes the most sense. And that may mean that there's a range of practices that are really supporting getting to the ideals of that person-centered planning process. It may also mean that there are tools, resources for planning and problem solving. That was something very specifically mentioned. You heard in the feedback. How do we have plain language tools and resources that help to facilitate these conversations? And so today, what I'm going to do is really talk about the framework, not necessarily yet about the practices or the tools, because we want to hear from you. What makes sense to you? What do you think works? How do you want to see LifeCourse incorporated into the planning process to support the work that you do in supporting people and families? Because the framework is for everybody, right? It is about the person, the individual is at the center. And ultimately, we do want people to achieve self-determination and interdependence, productivity, integration, all of those things that we all want for our own lives. But we also want to be thinking about the individual in the context of their family. And how are we supporting families to really maximize their capacity and their strengths? How are we thinking about an individual with a disability as a member of a family unit, whatever that family might look like? We'll talk about that in just a little bit. And how do we really leverage and support those relationships in such a way that it's a good life for all, right? It's a good life for all family members. But the framework is also for you. It is for professionals to really have resources and tools and the support that you need to provide those person-centered services for the individual. It is a way to, like Barb said, it's a lens, it's a mindset. It's oftentimes we hear people talk about, it's just kind of gotten into my way of thinking. I don't even need the worksheet. Right? It's just something that I can do in conversation. And so hopefully, again, today, you'll see how these concepts might be applied in the work that you are doing and share your thoughts and feedback with us. Everything that we do, we want to be driven by the person and their family. You see that as we start the conversation this morning with the feedback from the self-advocate group, really talking about what they want to see from the planning process. So not only are we thinking about what does it look like to have a person-centered planning process for the individual, but what does it look like to have a system that is person-centered and that is driven by the individual and their family, really defining what they want to see in their individual lives and from the services and supports that facilitate that. And so the Charting the Life course framework is a way to support the spectrum of self-advocacy, so to speak, both a way to facilitate conversations of what do you want for your life and how do we get there, but also what do you want from the system that supports you? And how do we get there together in partnership, knowing that it will take all of us in order to see that vision realized. Like Betsy said, we really begin with the principle of all people. We know that we want to be thinking about all people, regardless of their age or their ability or their family role, as we design and develop services and supports, as we think about our policies and practices. We recognize that as a general rule, we're only supporting a small percentage of the total population of people with disabilities in the state of Maine. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's a great thing. It gives us an opportunity to zero in and really understand who is it that we're supporting and what do those individuals need? Is that reflective of the 100% of our state from a diversity perspective, from an equity perspective? Are we really making sure that there's equal access and that there are opportunities for people to receive services and supports in such a way that's responsive to their diverse backgrounds, preferences, and cultural needs? It also helps us to recognize that there are people who are not receiving services. And perhaps there are things we can learn from that group of people to say, what are your strengths? What's working? What community resources are really supporting you? How can we develop a service and support system that looks like life and not just like supports and services? And so we think about this full spectrum of the all, recognizing that we want to make sure we are providing the best services and supports we possibly can in that green triangle, but also knowing that we want to make our state supportive of people with disabilities, regardless of whether they receive services from the department or not. That means that we have to think about people within the context of their family and community. All of us come from somewhere, right? Whether we've had a great family experience, a not so great family experience, whether we're still connected to our family or we don't talk to them, whether our family is the family we were born into or the group of friends that we've chosen to adopt as our family. We all exist within some sort of family system that has impacted us and that we are impacting. There are reciprocal relationships and roles. And so we have to understand the individual as a part of that family system in order to do quality person-centered planning, which means we start by recognizing the family is defined by the person. They get to decide who their family members are. That may be, again, a big family. It may be a small family. It may be biological. It may be relationship-based. But we start with recognizing family is more than just mom and dad or brother and sister. It may include grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, cousins. You know, it really is about who does this person identify as the people who care about them and care for them, and the people they care about and care for. And how does that impact who's involved in the planning process, as well as how those relationships are really supporting the individual in pursuit of their vision of a good life.
Jenny, could we just pause 1 second and we'll switch interpreters? All set. Thank you.
Great. Family is not dependent on where a person lives, right? We know that that sometimes we continue to stay very closely connected, and sometimes we are not in the same city or even in the same state. And so how are we really recognizing how to involve and include the family that the person has chosen throughout the lifespan into all of the different processes, really respecting the uniqueness of relationships and culture and family norms, knowing that what might make sense for me and my family may not make sense for an individual that I'm supporting and their family. And so how are we really thinking about and doing great person-centered planning that is reflective of those ideals, recognizing that we all have people who care about us, right? We all need people who love us and provide us with affection and self-esteem and spend time with us, who create memories with us. We all need people who know us really well, right? And that we trust to communicate maybe when we can't always communicate those things. I've always said it's really important to me that the person I end up with know how I take my coffee, right? He should be able to drive through the drive-through, order my coffee, and not have to ask me what I want. And that's just a little example of how those relationships of caring about also then lead to caring for a person. Many times in our system, we are thinking about and concerned with, as we should be, who cares for an individual. But we also want to expand that conversation to recognize that those relationships of caring about are equally as important. So how are we facilitating exploration around who an individual trusts and who trusts them, who that person is caring about in their life, and what that role might look like in that reciprocation, and in really providing opportunity for people to have meaningful, valued roles within their community. We think not only about this caring about, but we do recognize the importance of caring for, and really thinking about who supports the individual's day-to-day needs, their material and financial needs, who is helping them connect to meaningful relationships, and advocating for the supports that they might need in their day-to-day life. So it's this balance of recognizing not only do we want to be concerned about the physical, right? We also want to be concerned about the emotional, and really thinking holistically about the well-being of a person, and providing opportunity for the individual to have choice, like we heard in the feedback, about who plays these roles in their life. How are services and supports designed to integrate, we're going to get to this a little bit later, but to integrate all of the different people and places and supports that can fill in the boxes, so to speak, for an individual, so that it's not just about, well, what service can provide this, but how are we helping an individual to design the constellation of relationships and supports that make the most sense for them, so that all of the caring about and caring for needs are met. That is one aspect or one part of the vision of a good life, right? As we think about really the heart of person-centered planning, it's about helping an individual to identify where it is they want to go and what might need to happen in order to get there. I told the group yesterday, I am not great with directions. It is not my skill set. You don't want me to be your road trip buddy for multiple reasons. One is that I always fall asleep in the car, so I'm pretty boring, but I also am not a good navigator. But we trust Siri, right? In my car, Siri is always telling us where we need to go. And in order for Siri to help facilitate that drive, she has to know the destination. Many times in our service system, we start with what's the path instead of what is the destination. And so this concept around life trajectory and life experiences and life stages is really helping us to first and foremost say, what do we want? Where is it we want to go? Whether that's a broad picture of what does a good life look like, just overall, what does a good year look like? What does a good day look like? Sometimes is as much as we can plan. But I love this quote. I wish I could give credit. I have no idea where it came from, but it says the future is not something we enter. The future is something we create. And creating that future requires us to make choices and decisions that begin with a dream. I think that it's really important that we recognize part of our role in person-centered planning is helping a person to make informed choices and decisions about the pathway that they might take. And in order to help with that, in order to really facilitate that conversation and to facilitate problem solving and planning and decision making, we have to know what a person wants. So let's just take a moment. It's always good to get a little bit of a break and have some interaction. We are going to do an exercise. I would love to ask people to go to menti.com. That's MENTI.com. And you're going to type in a code 22955125. And if you're willing, we would love for you to share what your good life looks like. What is your destination, so to speak? What are some things that you want for your life? Just a couple of words if you want to type those into the response bubble. Again, you'll go to menti.com. I will put the direct link in the chat as well. It keeps closing my voting. There we go. We would love to just have a couple of people share with us. All right, seeing some things pop in. People want prosperity, happiness, nature, ambition, adventure, family, living close to family, new experiences, good life experiences, love, happiness is coming up quite a bit, regretless, stability, health, support, family by my side, laughter, debt-free, purpose, meaning, creativity, fun, a cat. Yes, I just had to kick my cat out of my home office. He really wanted to be a part of our meeting today. Travel, I don't know who said that, but I am 100% with you. That's part of my good life. I see education in the chat box, feeling a connectedness in life in the Zoom chat box as well. Adventure, freedom, humor, simplicity, rewarding work, absolutely. Health. Thank you everyone for responding. I think feel free to continue typing in and you'll see in the word cloud, the words that keep coming up more and more, the big words or the popular words are the things that people are saying. And I think as you're looking at this, you hopefully can see how this sets the stage then to say, okay, if happiness is where you want to go, right? If that's what your good life is, what makes you happy? And how do we then think about that trajectory across the lifespan? What are the different life experiences that are going to help you to achieve happiness, so to speak, that are going to make you feel happy? If travel is part of your good life, what are some outcomes? What are some goals around travel that would really be meaningful to you? This could be something as simple as learning to read a map, right? I love to travel. I don't like being lost. And so how can we take these concepts around what a good life is for a person and use those to help guide and direct meaningful goals and outcomes that are about the preferences of a person and that are supporting them towards the good life that they want? I will tell you, sometimes that's an easy leap, right? We can really see how financial stability, for example, might lead to some pretty clear goals and outcomes that are driven by the person. But sometimes it's difficult to fully kind of articulate or understand what it is somebody wants. And so we can ask the question, and I'm going to ask you now, what don't you want? What do you want to avoid? Sometimes we ask, what's your vision of a good life? Because that helps us to know where we want to go. But we can also ask, where don't you want to go? I'm seeing things pop in. Drama, large groups of friends. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's really important that we recognize what we like doesn't always mean what everybody else likes. And this can help to crystallize and really clarify and articulate, I want community connectedness. I don't want a large group of friends. And that then drives some of those goals to be very specific and person-centered about what the individual may want. Seeing other things, conflict, negativity, jail, pain, sadness, isolation, homelessness, too many demands, toxic people, dishonesty, worry, sedentary, disrespect, hate, conflict, depression, divorce, student loans. Yes, I'm with you there, right? So sometimes asking this question, and feel free to keep having those come in, but sometimes asking the question of what don't you want, again, helps us to really identify where is it that we're going and what do we need to avoid along the way. Sometimes we make decisions with the absolute best of intention, but there are unintended consequences, right? And so thinking about a trajectory, first identifying the vision, thinking about what we don't want, helps us to know how it's our gut check, for lack of a better term. Are we headed where we want to go, or are we headed where we don't want to go? And I think it also gives some power and choice and control back to the person to say, will this decision take you closer to your vision of a good life, or is it going to take you closer to where it is you don't want to be? Sometimes we're going to choose, I don't really care. Spending money that's not in my budget is actually going to take me towards my vision of not what I want, but I'm doing it anyway, right? And that's part of allowing that informed choice and that control to the individual, and really thinking about that dignity of risk that we'll talk about in just a minute. I think for many of us, and this is again something that we heard in the feedback from the self-advocates and from the reform group, we oftentimes think, all right, we've defined that vision of a good life, and so now what services will help us to get to that vision of a good life? But if we really think about it, services and supports are a way of facilitating the experiences that help us to achieve that trajectory. For many of us, we probably are where we are now, not just because of a formal support or service, but because of the life lessons we've learned along the way, because of the different experiences that we've had across our lifespan that have either helped us get closer to what we want or taught us something because it's taken us to where we don't want to go. So marriage is an easy example. If getting married is something that is part of your vision of a good life, There are some services that could help you with that. 90 Day Fiance, if you wanted to apply to go on that TLC show. I've heard 2 of them from last season worked out, or maybe that was Love is Blind. I don't know. Anyway, the point is, the experience that helps to move towards marriage for many people is dating, right? There are services to help with dating. There are dating apps. There are different, classes you can take if dating is difficult for you, but the experience itself is the point, and that's what leads to the vision. And so when we think about how we're helping people plan, we're really planning around what is it that you want? What are the experiences that will help you get there? And then what are the services and supports that can facilitate those experiences? As we're having those conversations, we want to recognize and we want to really be thinking broadly about a holistic vision of a good life and experiences in all of the different life domains. So we know that health and safety are critically important, but they are not the only aspects or the only components of what makes a person happy or helps them to achieve that vision of what their good life is. It's critical. Like I said, Maslow hierarchy of needs would say you got to start with health and safety. And so those are 2 important things we want to consider. But we also think about, what do people do during the day, and where do they live, and what are their social connections and things that they do for fun? What is their valued role in the community, and how are they involved in things that matter to them and give purpose and meaning, like many of you mentioned in your vision of a good life, to their life? This is a great example of a way that Maine is taking the concept, right? The concept around thinking about all of the different life domains and really customizing it into a practice. And so in Maine, there are 8 person-centered planning domains to really think about this holistic idea of what makes up a person's good life, what are the different experiences in lots of different life domains that are going to help lead to what that vision of a good life is. And so you see how Maine has, again, kind of customized the concept of life domains, and you see on the screen the 8 specific domains that Maine has chosen to use, which you'll hear more about in some other conversations. I think, like we talked about, and I won't spend a ton of time here, it's just really important that we continue to recognize how to balance the health and safety needs with all of those other life domains, and really thinking about how are we supporting people to have dignity of risk, recognizing that we learn from life experiences that go well and from those that don't go so well. We learn from the choices that take us where we want, but also take us where we don't want to go. A person doesn't learn to stay safe if someone's always protecting them from everything, right? People learn to stay safe by having the experiences, by being able to say no, to learn who to trust and not trust. Take the dating example or the marriage example again. Sometimes we learn who we want to marry by dating people we don't want to marry, right? And getting our heart broken and having some bad experiences. And so how are we really supporting people to take risks, balancing the need for health and safety, but also respecting their right to self-determination and, again, informed choice by asking the question, is this going to take you where you want to be, or is this going to take you where you don't want to go? We really believe that in order to help a person kind of along the trajectory of life to achieve that vision, we need to be thinking about lots of different types of needs. You may have heard the expression, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. I'm going to say, don't put all of your resources in one bucket, right? We think about all of the different types of needs that all people have. This is not just people with disabilities. This is all people. I'm constantly thinking about the 3 buckets in my own life or in my own work even. So when it comes to those individual needs, when we think about how to support people along their trajectory of life, we know everyone needs information and training. We need the skills to navigate the life that we want, to navigate towards the life that we want. We also need opportunities to talk to someone who's been there before, to connect with people, to have that social affirmational support. And we need goods and services. We are not saying services are bad or that we don't want them, but we're putting them as a part of a broader picture of the different types of support that an individual might need.
Interpreter speaking, if we could pause 1 second, we're switching interpreters. Okay, all set. Thank you.
All right, so as we think about these three buckets, the blue bucket is really, I think about it as the head bucket, right? It's the information, the education, training on the best practices, or really developing the skills that we might need. That orange bucket is the heart bucket, right? It's connections, it's networks, it's professional or non-professional emotional support networks that really help us to have the capacity, right, to navigate all of the things in life, good, bad, and otherwise. And the green bucket are those tangible goods and services that provide the daily support and really help people to move towards their goals. If that feels like a lot, right, we know that no one entity, no one person, no one organization can be responsible for filling all three buckets, for doing all of the caring about and caring for roles of a person. Not any one provider, not any one family member, not any one piece of technology. And so we think about how are we sprinkling, so to speak, different types of support? How are we connecting and leveraging lots of different types of resources in the context of how a person wants to receive those supports and services based on what makes sense for their family, based on where they live? How are we really integrating supports and services for an individual to help fill those buckets in pursuit of their vision of a good life? And that's where this concept around an integrated support star comes into play. So when we think about integrating supports and services, you see that green support and service is there, right? We are recognizing the importance of those eligibility specific services, but we're actually starting with the strengths of the individual and recognizing what it is they bring to the table, the resources they have, the skill sets and the knowledge and the experiences they have, their personal belongings, right? How are they contributing to their vision of a good life, to their goals? How are we building the skill sets of the individual potentially to help them achieve what that vision of a good life looks like? We also know that relationships are critically important and are a part of all of our support system. And so how are we elevating, recognizing, and supporting the role of family members, friends, and acquaintances that provide different types of support in different intensities at different times for the individual? How can they help really support the goals and the outcomes that the person has chosen based on the experiences they want to have? How are we really using technology? I joked about the mini computer that I wear on my wrist and how it tells me when to stand up and sit down, and I can turn on and off the function to help me breathe. So really thinking about how does personal technology, but also environmental technology, things like Alexa or remote support, how are we really thinking about how those resources can be a part of a broader range of supports for an individual in helping them to achieve the life that they want? How do we connect people to places and spaces that anybody in the community can go to, whether those are businesses, parks, schools, faith-based communities, gyms, libraries, membership organizations, public supports, really thinking about in this community, where does everybody go, right? How does everybody receive those information and training, those connections and networking, and those goods and services, and how do we leverage those resources as a part of the broader array? I think what's really cool about the concept of an integrated support star is that we can think about how do the eligibility specific supports and services help to build out these other areas? How are we really leveraging some of those green supports, so to speak, to build a person's skill sets and strengths, to make connections in their community and with family and friends and acquaintances, to build community-based resources and to partner with those resources in order to support a person in pursuit of their goals and their dreams. That's really the Charting the Life Course framework in a nutshell. I know that was a really quick overview, but we want to hear from you. Like we said, this is an important conversation and an opportunity for you to share. These are maybe some concepts that I've heard, or maybe it's something that's familiar to me, but it's a little bit of a different word. But we want to know how now you think Maine can take these ideas and really put them into practice to support you in the work that you do of supporting individuals and families. So we're going to go back to the mentee. and just answer a few questions. Know that all of this information is stored and captured. So it's anonymous, but we are able to pull down these results, and that it will help us as we continue. Maine is a member of the community of practice going forward. So it will help us as we continue to identify how do we adopt and integrate these different principles and concepts into the work that's already ongoing.
Hey Jenny, sorry to interrupt, but there were a few people that had a hard time getting into Menti. So I just want to assure those you as participants that we are capturing the chat for you so that your thoughts and ideas will be captured as well.
Great, thanks, Barb. So the first question we have is what stood out to you the most? As we talk about charting the life course and the framework, what seemed the most helpful? What did you like? Was there anything that really just stood out to you that you want to mention? Great, seeing some support and some feedback around really moving to thinking about person-centered thinking about the focus of support being on all of life, the full picture, thinking about that vision of supporting a good life for all people, starting with strengths, really empowering the person by asking them what you want and what don't you want. Seeing lots of echoes of the vision of a good life really sticking out to people. Also seeing people mentioning, thinking about supports and services as a part of an integrated array of supports, including starting with the individual strengths, starting with the future, thinking about people in the context of their family, that full spectrum, really identifying what kind of family the person has and or wants. I think that's a really great point. It's not always about what family do you have right now, but what's the family that you want to build. Appreciate all of these reflections. Obviously, I can't read all of them, and I apologize for that. But again, seeing a lot of commonalities around focusing on a vision, thinking about that long term, what an individual wants, making sure then that we are recognizing the importance of experiences and being focused on the individual and not the system or the services, seeing the services as a way to support getting to that destination and the journey. Feel free to continue to type in these responses. Like I said, we will be capturing them, even though we're not able to read all of them. I'm just going to check in the chat here. Seeing people commenting on the dignity of risk and how that is another important aspect that they felt stuck out to them. So then the second question that we have is of those concepts, of the things that are maybe making sense to you, sticking out, or that you like, is there something that you think you might do with charting the life course in your life or in your work? Did you hear something that might help with planning, problem solving, or decision making? And is there a way that you think we very intentionally did not share any tools today, but we really thought about the concepts? Because there are ways to use the concepts even without the worksheets or the tools. There are tools, we'll get to those eventually. But are there ways that you think you might use charting the life course, these concepts in your life or your work? Initial ideas that you might have. I love that, thinking about the filter of conversations, right? And using the concept of life goals and life trajectories as that filter, incorporating the life domains into the planning process and really thinking holistically, using the framework with individuals that we're supporting and helping them to focus on the destination. Love the idea of incorporating this into the comprehensive assessment, really thinking about where is a person now, where is it they want to go, what needs to happen to get there. Seeing people mentioning, exploring what people don't want, and is this taking you where you want to go or where you don't want to go? Really thinking about, again, that concept of trajectory and focusing on experiences and not services, thinking about career planning, seeing someone mentioning that they're already using some of this and rephrasing questions for individuals that are struggling to come up with their vision. I love that. Again, this is, there's not a prescription. This isn't, here's how you have to do charting the life course. It really is, here are the principles and how can we adapt and accommodate the different conversations that you want to have through this lens. Thinking about the 3 buckets, seeing lots of people mentioning that and really thinking about how to make sure all of those different needs are met. And thinking a lot about the future are some other themes that we're seeing. So the last question that we have, and again, feel free to continue to type into the chat as we are capturing that. I do see a question, and we will get there as we can about guardianship. And so thank you for putting that in there. Oh, I don't know what just happened. My screen switched on me, but we would love to hear from you. What are the needs that you might have, or what might you need to know about charting the life course to feel more confident in using the framework or in using the tools? I'm going to ask you, just for the sake of time, to continue to type in those responses, but we want to continue to move through this conversation today because, again, we're just aware of time and we've got some other things that we want to cover. So as you are continuing to type into the Mentimeter your responses of what you might need or what you might want for future trainings and some additional capacity building, let's talk a little bit now about how different states have integrated the Charting the Life Course framework into their planning processes. And so again, just so you know, I've switched back to sharing my screen with the PowerPoint. The Mentimeter is still up and active, so you can continue to type into that and we will capture those responses, but you're just not seeing it on your screen. I see it on mine, so it's continuing to roll. All right, so as we think about so we talked a lot about charting the life course as a methodology or as an approach, and states have done different things to really take this methodology and approach and integrate it into their systems work. I'm going to turn it over to Barb to talk a little bit about kind of what that's looked like from the community of practice, and then we'll share some specific examples with you. So Barb, take it away.
Thanks. And can we go to the next slide, please? So, if some of you that have been in the work, and if I'm looking up, I'm not looking toward the stars. It's early here, 3 hours difference, but so you've seen these, and Jenny put this up here. But within our history and why, as case managers, why you might be experiencing different things from different families across life stages. So if you think about families that are older and supporting people that are older as well, think about what's happened in our before there were really, life before waivers, which is before the 80s, before people ever got the notion of services, people were wrapped around their families, and sometimes the community was kind of far out there, unless they were in a community that was small or so accepting that it was just part of things. And maybe we can think about that for all. And then what happened? We got all kinds of services, and maybe we were taught, please forgive us, but we were taught, well, we'll get those services wrapped around the person, and the family kind of got bumped outside. And there will be, the community still will be out there. And maybe someone was around when the group homes first started, or some of the, it wasn't shared living at the time, but the family foster homes. And don't raise your hand or do anything like that. But has anybody either heard about where the family couldn't visit the first week or two? Somebody moved into a group home because of the disruption. As a state director, I had the card that we actually made up, or we didn't distribute, that I meant well and I'm sorry on the other side. But we pushed away the most stable person in someone's life. So as Jenny said, our hope is to sprinkle the goods and services in the community, the family, and for the person. So some of that's foundational for the community of practice. And so next slide. So why a community of practice? What you feel this, and in order to get there, what's going on? The changing demographics. The biggest number of people that provide direct support, and you feel this direct support professional crisis, is that the largest group of people providing supports and services are women ages 25 to 45. That group is competing with people that are aging, using that same age group. That age group is not growing. In fact, the age group is beginning to go away. And so that's a big pressure on the system. Expectations, the vision, and the culture. We have a lot of people that are coming into the system whose families have seen their loved ones perhaps growing up in fully inclusive schools, and may see something different. Federal policies, for the most part, are really reflecting moving into the community, and we see the institutions, congratulations, Maine, going away, and yet there's pressure, right, from the aging lobby and particularly the nursing home lobby. They are pushing for increasing. So there is a push-pull that is a little difficult. Demand for services, with the exception of a few states with different designs, the waiting lists are significant. The federal budget, you may have heard this. If you're not, what you are seeing is that there is we're having problems with the budget, but there's resentment at the worst, and at the best, confusion as to why so much of the budget in Medicaid is falling on people with IDD because of the often lifespan of people staying in the DD system so long, when people that are in senior services unfortunately are only with that system 2 or 3 years on average, and people with physical disabilities have not lesser needs, but different needs that may not cost as much. And so what do we need to do to try to embrace family and have a sustainable service that's really of good quality? And so there's federal initiatives that try to alleviate that. There's a lot within the Administration for Community Living, like Lifespan Respite and Family Medical Leave Act, to try to help caregivers. But we know Medicaid is the engine, and as case managers, don't you feel that DD, every time you sit with a family, you're hearing, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? That you have to be able to do this, and when somebody comes into the system, you're the golden ticket. You can't be. And does that even create a good life for someone? If everything's a paid service through Medicaid, which it can't be through your waivers, you know this. And with the size of your caseloads, I don't know your average, but there is no average caseload. But we're usually seeing 45 to 50 with very different responsibilities on up to the state of Washington, which is 1 to 500. So, next slide. So Windspread was the foundation for the community of practice, and you may feel that push-pull between what self-advocates want and what families want. We saw that worry about guardians, and we'll be working on that with you, and there's a lot of good ideas from other states as well as from you. So what is it? So it really is, and I will read it because it's important, and then we'll get to the information. So it's still the belief that the person has self-determination, interdependence, productivity, and inclusion in all parts of community life. And for that to happen, families have to be supported in ways that maximize their capacity, strengths, and unique abilities to best nurture, love, and support their individual to achieve their goal. So it is both. And next slide. So why the community of practice? it started small with a little funding for the Administration for Community Living for policies and practice and systems transformation, and started with really 6 states, and it's grown to 22 and welcome Maine. And so let's go to the next slide for the sake of time. So it really is, as we've talked about, that policy practice. Much has been around person-centered planning. And so it's also looked at national policies and to help states build that capacity. And so that's what we've worked on. We learn from states as much as the national team provides information. So, and states will learn from Maine. And so next slide. I'm going to skip this one for the sake of time. So it's best practices from everybody, and it's learning from some of what you see when you get to the tools, the integrated support star. We have to thank Connecticut. While the integrated support star was more stylized and perfected, and there's never perfection, but they're the ones that held up their hand for the 5 points of the star, thinking through, boy, we got to think about strengths, we have to think about technology, we have to think about relationships. But so many of the ideas that you see came from states, and it's that working together that has the framework, has the tools come together, and it's that sharing that really creates some of the strong practices that will move further into your strong practices. And it's full of stakeholders, families, self-advocates, state policy people. Over time, you see people outside the IDD system, as Jenny said, and it has its cautionary notes. So just a few things. When you see that triangle of how many people, so I thought maybe you'd like to hear the cautionary notes. Sometimes they're as valuable as the things that are really exciting. So when you see that triangle of how many people are actually receiving services, sometimes that causes sheer naked panic as a new state in the COP. Like, does that mean everybody that comes to the door is going to receive services? Breathe. That's not the intent, that you need to open wide the doors. The resources you have are the resources you have. It's just a recognition that the outreach to all, what we can learn from everybody, it's an acknowledgement to others that there is a greater group of people that aren't receiving supports. It doesn't mean like all the income free and you have to change everything you do. The other thing that I think that we've learned throughout this is that when you see the integrated support star, sometimes providers may see it, or even a family, but we've seen a lot of providers worry that means that people aren't going to get the services, that it's going to take away, rather than the integrated support star. If you notice it, it is the same in every point. It's the same size. It's not meant to take anything away. It's meant to have a full life. So those are the cautionary notes, that some of the things we've learned so far. And so next slide. So let's talk about some of the examples we've seen. There's lots of examples across waivers, across policies, but let's just talk about a few things we've seen actually in person-centered planning. And next slide. I have some feelings about this around systems needs and person needs, in that I think what it really is balancing what keeps the Medicaid money flowing, which is that needed, but how to do it in a way that eases the burden and confusion for families, self-advocates, and I've been a case manager too, and then in Arizona they were all state case managers, and knowing what it took to get through the day. So I'm going to have Jenny do this because we'll see what that slide does, but that's the intent.
I think as we think about person-centered planning, there are multiple aspects involved in that process, right? And so we know that there's first kind of the planning process, which is where the discovery and exploration, the problem solving, there's a robust conversation facilitated sometimes and sometimes not, right? It's gathering all of the information to really understand the person, to understand their family, to think about, it's all of those charting the life course things, right? Thinking about the vision and the experiences and the support. And so how are we gathering that information is one aspect of person-centered planning. Then how do we take that information and put it into a document that is meeting what is going to keep the Medicaid money flowing, like Barb said, but is also useful for the individual and their family in planning, in problem solving, in decision making. One of the things you saw from Self Advocates is, was a quote, and I apologize, I won't get it exactly right, but was just, I don't know what my plan says, right? And so how are we making sure that the document is both for the person and for the system at the same time? And that takes some interpretation, some skill sometimes, because sometimes the information that we've gathered and that exploration is robust. And so how do we put that into a planning document that then can be authorized for approval of those supports and services to help a person in achieving what their vision is. And so that's kind of the third bubble around the administrative requirements. And how do we make sure that's a seamless process, that it's not two different things, right? That it's a robust planning conversation, that there are authorization requirements that are reflective of that planning conversation, and that ultimately the plan is helping to support both sides of that coin. So several states have implemented this in different ways, and I think Barb is going to talk about how Maryland has done that.
So Maryland really has the yin-yang that we always talk about. That is the sort of the grassroots ideas of charting the life course and the systems part of integrating charting the life course. And they have done everything from looking at their waivers around the ideas of the different life domains, and they actually have put in these different domains into their person-centered planning processes. And one of the things that we really like, besides very much simplifying it, so it's embedded into their ISP, is that they've also have a springboard that has put it into their employment piece. So their discovery and exploration and problem solving is not what you would think of as the really kind of rigid part of discovery that people are certified in and that kind of thing. It's really having those same conversations. So they've managed to link it into their person-centered planning with their focus area that leads to an outcome. It's not just, we like to talk about lifelong learning, but what does that mean? How do we get there with tangibles? But they've also, which I think is just really great, on their customized employment, little c, little e, again, not the certification, to how do you build on that discovery to get to a problem solving. So we've really liked it. It took them a while to get there, and I guess that's another piece, is that it's inclusive of stakeholders, and it's pretty seamless. And they've had a few, bumps in the road, because the first time out with any planning process, there's bumps in the road, but it's coming together very nicely. And it's an inclusive process, and it's been grassroots, and it also has the system pieces, and it's been well received by CMS, the regional office. So that's good news too. And next slide.
Great, thanks, Barb. So a little different than Maine. Maine really took the domains and said, we're going to explore a focus area based on the domains that an individual has chosen. So just like you saw that Maine has customized the domain, so has Maryland. And then they ask each team to really pick that focus domain based on the person's preferences and what's most important to them, and to dig into that with some different processes they have designed. South Dakota, a little bit differently, has said, here are the things that we believe are critical for a person-centered plan to truly be person-centered. And so they have requirements in their administrative rule around what planning documents have to include. They do not say how you have to arrive at that information. So you will see echoes of charting the life course in this rule with, vision of a good life, integrated supports and services, thinking about quality of life outcomes, past and future experiences, all of those things. But what South Dakota has determined is whatever approach you choose to use, whether that's person-centered thinking from the learning community, MAP, PACT, charting the life course, these are the things that the plan must include and must reflect based on that discussion in order to be considered person-centered. Barb, do you want to talk about Indiana?
So, I shouldn't be muted now. So Jenny and I both have done a lot of work in, yes,
Barb, I'm so sorry. This is, we just need to spotlight the second interpreter.
of course.
All set. Thanks.
Yeah, so Jenny and I have both done a lot of work in Indiana. And so I was probably there more at the beginning of their thinking, and Jenny's been there really a lot and more recently. And so their planning document, and they're still doing more on it, and Jenny may be able to talk about more now. But when they first started, they said, I think they said we hate it. It was pretty rigid, and it had enough acronyms that they won the acronym award. And they also had families and people with disabilities say, I won the golden ticket, which is the waiver, but I don't understand what anything means. And so we also took a look at where the services were, and case managers know most of this, where utilization is. And the services that would most support families were hardly ever used. It was services that were counterintuitive. And so they said, what do we do about this? So they first sat with case managers and said, why? Why do you think that is? Then they sat with providers, self-advocates, and families to affirm, is that true? And they rooted it back to their planning document and began to align planning for each life domain. And then, homegrown, they put it into a software system and started to have some real success on it. And I think we're not going to be able to have time to go further. So let's just go to the next slide. And that is Connecticut. And all we really want to say about Connecticut is that they tried to do everything all at once, scrapped it, and now they are really focusing on a couple areas and putting some wonderful software together to best understand and support their state case managers in best supporting families and people with disabilities. And always we run out of time, so we're going to wrap it up with some other thoughts.
So we would love to hear from you. I know we very quickly kind of reviewed Indiana, who took the domains and said, for each of the life domains, here are the areas that we need to be thinking about and talking about. And so you're seeing their ISP guide really getting into how are we talking about what a person wants, their integrated supports related to each of those life domains. differently than Connecticut, who requires some of the person-centered planning tools of charting the life course in their planning document. So you see the trajectory and the integrated support star, and they are actually required documents to be submitted with that person-centered plan.
And they had like 10 of them, and then it went boom, and then they pulled back.
So what we want to do now is just, and again, apologize that we are going to be a bit short on time, but we do want to hear from you just quickly your initial thoughts and reactions, reflections of what you like and what you think makes sense related to the examples that we've shared about person-centered planning, limited though they may be. So if you'll go back to the Menti meter one more time, the Menti, that same browser, and just let us know your initial kind of first blush thoughts. What did you like about the examples of other states and how they've used charting the life course as part of their planning process? What made sense to you? What clicked for you? If you would just type in some quick thoughts about what you liked about the examples you heard from other states' use of charting the life course. So seeing some responses about the software program and how those might have been developed using charting the life course to inform them, thinking about the holistic quality of the plan with all of the different life domains. The visuals were helpful for folks, really thinking about the structured use of how charting the life course has been integrated, making sure that it's user-friendly, that there are good visuals and software that kind of is reflective of those principles and those tools, thinking about prioritizing different life domains and sections. So if you will continue to type in your responses about what you liked, again, these are just helpful as we think about what the next steps might be in Maryland or in Maine. I apologize, I saw Maryland on the screen and said the wrong word. But I think now we want to kind of shift and give it to Betsy to talk about where do we go from here and how will we use this feedback and what are some of the next steps related to continuing this journey with implementation and adoption. So to Betsy.
Great, thank you. If you want to go to the next steps, there we go. Thank you. So thanks, Jenny and Barb. Really appreciate your time with us this morning. And also thanks to everyone else for joining us for this conversation. So where we're going with this, this is just the start of other training that will be occurring for sure, and other conversations we'll be having, and including some more targeted tools that we want to be able to help people have access to. One of those tools is a platform called Open Futures Learning. So we will be sharing some more information about that platform and how you'll be able to access that to use that in your work. We're going to be providing some training coming up on some changes that will have to happen in EIS. There are happening in EIS as we think about some of the changes in the person-centered planning process. We're updating and we'll be providing some dissemination of our updated PCP guide. So look for that coming out. And by all of these things that I'm talking about, you will have opportunities to have training on them, and as we share them going forward. We're also updating information on our website around the person-centered planning information that we're updating. If you have questions or feedback about today's sessions or anything else related to the person-centered planning process, this email address is live and we check it on a regular basis, personcenteredplanning.dhhs@maine.gov. So feel free outside of this training or any other time to send email there. Next slide. So many of you have asked and would like to know how to get a certificate of attendance for today. So you can complete the knowledge check that is posted to our website. There's the website listed there. I'm sure many of you have done this previously. And if you go to Introduction to Charting the Life Course knowledge check, you can complete that. And then that will generate a certificate of attendance directly to your email inbox for today's training. And next slide. I think that's the last slide. So we don't have any more information to share for today, but there will be more information coming for sure. Again, we really thank you for joining us today. I said this yesterday, and I think you've gathered that we're really excited about the use of this framework. And as Jenny's mentioned, and I mentioned early on, we know that this is not new information. Rather, we're just excited to be returning to some of the principles and values that we really believe in strongly, and that this framework is going to help us get there. We realize in your roles as being on the front line in helping individuals complete their person-centered plans, that you have you will play a very important part in this role. So Kristen and her team will be working with you throughout the time over the course of the next year, really, as we start to move ahead with this work. We recognize that the person-centered plan really is at the heart of everything that we're talking about as we think about helping people access their communities, as we talk about coming into compliance with HCBS, as we talk about other compliance issues, but more importantly about really returning to having people be the focus, the individual, the center of this work. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Jenny and Barb, for your excellent information that you shared today, and really look forward to working with you as we move forward in our journey.
It's been an honor. Thank you for having us.
Bye, everyone.